Hey, what's up, everybody? So today I wanted to talk about the city of Chicago and the tragic news story that just came out stating that the city of Chicago has just surpassed 500 homicides for this year, and there's been around 3,000 shootings. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Chicago and the violence in Chicago and how it affects the rest of the country, and more specifically people that live in the Midwest, such as myself. Now, for those who don't know, Chicago is the third largest city in the United States of America, and in terms of GDP, the city of Chicago's economy is worth about $500 billion. So it has a very robust economy, and there's definitely some very affluent parts of Chicago, but in Chicago, there's a lot of income inequality to a point where in some parts of Chicago, it's gotten so bad that the residents have started calling Chicago chiraq in reference to the war in Iraq, where during some of the years during the height of the insurgency, the troop deaths or the U.S. troop deaths weren't as high as the homicide rate in Chicago. And even though the city of Chicago has seen a decrease in the homicide rate, since the 80s and 90s, where the homicides were around 700, 800 homicides a year, the city of Chicago has seen a sort of a spike or a surge in the amount of shootings and homicides within the city. And I think, and I would say most experts would say that the reason for this is because of the gang violence within Chicago. Now, for those who don't know, Chicago has about 100,000 to 150,000 gang members within the city proper, and those gangs pretty much turn those neighborhoods into war zones. There's kids who are unable to go to school. They have to drop out because they might have to walk, literally a tenth of a mile to get to their school, but it crosses a gang line or a really bad area, and they're unable to make it to school due to the gang's presence within their neighborhoods, and that's very, very sad. And also, with there being so many gangs, there's about, I would say, there's two major prison alliances called the Folk and the People Nation. The Folk is the Gangster Disciples, Black Disciples, couple other gangs, and then you have like the People Nation, which is Black P-Stones, Vice Lords, and Latin Kings, and an assortment of other gangs or whatever. And these gangs or whatever, there's no structure, there's no leadership due to the RICO laws, where basically during the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, you've seen a lot of the gangs hierarchy being locked up, and now you have basically smaller, less organized gangs. So, like, you might have the Gangster Disciples, which is, from what I've researched, the largest gang in Chicago. It has about 30 or so thousand members. And, even though that sounds like a large gang, there's basically, a couple hundred different sets of GDs. And then, like, you have the Black P-Stones, which I think are the second largest, and they have, tens of thousands of members. So it's like, these gangs, they're only separated by, maybe a block or so. Some of them might even be on a street over from each other. And then, when someone shoots another person's friend, or, someone they might have, family member, someone, a lot of these gang conflicts are due to simply, if someone kills one of your friends or family members, there's a retaliation for that killing. And it's getting to a point where it's very unfortunate, because a lot of people want to make it seem as if it's only criminals being shot, but there's a lot of innocent bystanders who get hit in the crossfire. There was a Chicago rapper by the name of Young Pappy, who actually, I think he was from North Chicago, and he had two hits that were put on him. Basically, I think the second one, there was a innocent bystander who was standing next to him at a bus stop or whatever, and he got hit and was killed. And the third attempt on his life, he was murdered. But you just see, like, the gang conflicts don't just end in the criminal world. It affects everybody. And then in terms of the Midwest, a lot of these Chicago gangs, due to the the amount of like competition and just the over market saturation within Chicago, they moved to other major cities throughout the Midwest to a point where you see a lot of the Chicago gangs in pretty much every major city within the Midwest and some cities outside the Midwest. But I mean, I've definitely seen Gangster Disciple graffiti, Latin King graffiti, Black Peace Zone graffiti, and I live in Ohio, and you see it here because the gangs are like sort of like the Crips and the Bloods out on the West Coast, where they moved to other places to make more money. And in Chicago, it just seems like it's a lot of competition. There's just a lot of there's just too much market saturation, so they moved to other places to expand their operations. Now, another problem with Chicago is that they have a lot of the guns that excuse me, there's like a sort of just threw me off. There's like, I think that's a ambulance or whatever, a fire truck. Yeah, it's an ambulance outside, and it sort of threw me off. But and then also with like the guns or whatever, the Chicago Police Department, they confiscate thousands, probably tens of thousands of guns every year. And a lot of the right-wing media outlets will use Chicago as an example of why tough gun legislation doesn't work. Well, the guns that are being confiscated in Chicago are guns that come from out of state. So what I mean is that let's say that you don't have any felonies on your record and you want to make a couple extra bucks. What you would do is you would go to, let's say, down south. You don't even have to travel down south. You can go to Indiana, or even my own state of Ohio, buy a gun very easily. If you have a clean record, you can buy a gun. Boom, 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 and then that gun is in your possession. And the people who are legally buying these guns will then, in turn, go to places such as Chicago and double their money. And that's a very, very profitable business to be into, like, such as like the cigarettes or whatever. That's another hustle that people do, is they'll go to, like, let's say Kentucky, where the cigarettes might be $4 or $5 a pack, and then they go to New York, sell them to the bodegas for like $8 a pack, and they're basically sometimes doubling their money, or they're making a very huge profit, or they have a high profit margin or whatever. And that's another way that people will go out of state to sell different products that might be more expensive in that particular state. But in Chicago, since there's really no gun registry, federally speaking, people who buy and sell guns, it's like once you sell a gun to another person, for the most part, there's no like, it's not like how you can, there's no like transference of ownership like there is cars. And I'm a person who is very, I would say, on a lot of issues, I agree with the Republicans on gun policy, such as I don't want bans on assault rifles, no magazine restrictions. I don't think you should have waiting periods, things like that. But I do think, based on what's going on and the evidence at hand, that if you would have a gun registry where, let's say that a gun that is confiscated in a homicide, or a felon is confiscated with a gun, they can trace that gun back to the person who was an owner of that gun and say, look, if you sold this gun to this person and you didn't, do a background check on them to make sure they're not a criminal, then, you can be in trouble for that. And I'm perfectly fine with that, and I'm not against the transfer of guns between individuals, as long as the individual is not a criminal. I know that might sound, crazy for a lot of Americans, but in other countries, this is just the simple stuff that they do to ensure that guns don't fall in the hands of criminals. And yes, a lot of the guns are stolen, but you can still put a dent in a lot of the legal guns that are, being pipelined from legal purchases into the hands of criminals. Because, Glocks, for instance, I have a Glock 17. I paid around $500 for it, and I guarantee you that if I would go to Chicago, I can probably double my money, I can double my money selling it on the street, because with the Glock 17 with a 32 round clip and a laser pointer on it, that's highly sought after, and it's in high demand. So but these are the kind of things that need to be discussed. And a lot of people, they're just so wound up in their own, political beliefs and ideology that they can't sit down with people that might disagree with them and try to come up with an optimal solution based on factual evidence. And, to the families of the victims of these murders, my heart goes out to them, because I lost my father to gun violence, and I've lost a couple friends to gun violence, and it's very, very unfortunate. And yes, a lot of the people who were probably killed were, they might have been in that lifestyle, but a lot of those people who were murdered might have just been killed because they lived in a certain neighborhood and they might have never even stolen a pack of gum before. So that's something we have to keep in mind. I hope that there's some sort of action that's taken on this to, prevent the homicide rate. I mean, once again, you have to tackle the issues of poverty, and you have to, and another issue too I heard in Chicago is that the trauma center is on the far north side of Chicago, and a lot of people, they die in transit going to the hospital. So that's something else that needs to be addressed. But please comment below on your thoughts and opinions on the matter. And that's all I have to say, and have a nice day. Peace.